Emma Crosby. Now, running a business is hard at the best of times, but trying to keep a business afloat with an ongoing war presents a very different kind of challenge to bosses in Israel. With staff being enlisted into the army, attention and priorities are focused on safety rather than profits, and rightly so. What has the last 18 days been like for firms in the country who are trying to survive? Well, joining me now is Daphne Nissenbaum. Daphne is the chief executive of TIPA, compostable packaging based in Israel. And Daphne, thank you very much for joining us this time. We know it's a very difficult time for you and your community, so we appreciate your time. Since the attacks on the 7th of October, what has happened to your business and your ability just to keep things running?
First of all, Emma, thank you for having me today. You know, we're under war. We're actually a nation in grief and mourning. But at the same time, we, as Israelis, keep our heads up and continue functioning just as before. We made sure that our company works as usual with all the support we get globally from our investors, from our clients, from our partners. And, you know, I'm very proud of our global team, and specifically with our Israeli team that keeps functioning as usual and as before to make sure that the business continues to run forward and no terrorism can actually shut us down.
And we know you have many employees in Israel. I mean, how are they, and are they able to still work?
So, yeah, we have around 30, 35 Israeli employees. Part of them were called to reserves. Part of our husbands, sons, daughters were called to military service. So we are short in staff, but you know, the TIPA employees, we take over the others that cannot actually function regularly business-wise these days. And we make sure that we fulfill all our missions and continue deploying our solutions globally.
And you are not alone with this challenge. We know that Israel has a very burgeoning young tech sector, and many of those people who work in that sector have been called up as army reservists. What is going to happen? What impact will that have on that sector, would you say?
We don't know yet. I think there will be some impact, but you know, we've always been, you know, one country in this area that actually continues to work as usual, and we make sure that it does even in very hard times for us. I think that we will see some influence, but the majority of the companies manage to function, manage to continue the business. For example, at TIPA, we have a global team that works with us, and the majority of the companies do have global teams. And it's one family, and together we work shoulder to shoulder to make sure that everything runs as usual. And hopefully we will minimize the impact.
I know that you work with many leading brands around the world. Many, of course, are in the UK, household names that we'll have heard of, the likes of Riverford Organics and Waitrose Dutchy Organics, in terms of the packaging you provide for them. What kind of response or support have you had from your partners around the world?
Wow, Emma, it was unbelievable. From October 7th, I started to get messages from globally, from people all over the globe supporting us till today. Everyone that knew us in the past or knows us today offers help, support. We have great shareholders that support us, great clients, partners. We were offered help. We don't need help right now, but we were offered help. And hopefully we want. And it's very heartwarming to know that we get this support globally. And it's actually also something that, you know, one important point of light that helps us move forward as individuals, as a company, and as a nation.
And Daphne, just briefly, if you will, in closing, I read an article that at the beginning of the year you said you were very excited about 2023. How do you feel now?
Still, you know, what we do in TIPA is we've invented, developed, and we manufacture and sell compostable solutions, packaging solutions to eliminate the damage of plastic. So we all work for the future as a company. We work for the future, for the generations to come, to leave behind us a better world for our children. And we'll continue to do that, even in hard time, even with evil, as we have seen. And 2023 is challenging, but we will defeat evil.
Okay.
And we will make sure.
Daphne, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have to leave it there, but we appreciate you coming on, and we wish you the very best as well. Daphne Nissenbaum there from TIPA Compostable Packaging. Well, let's take you to Saudi Arabia now, and what's been dubbed Davos in the desert, the Future Investment Initiative Conference sees finance ministers and business leaders meeting together as Saudi tries to wean its economy, at least, off oil profits. Well, earlier, I spoke to Tony Berkeley. He's the head of investment for the Institute, earlier it was, I should say, from the meeting in Riyadh. And I started by asking him whether recent events in the Middle East had impacted the conference.
Our world today is an unpredictable world. It's torn by conflict and crises, and there's a lot of questions in the minds of our capital markets leaders about the future. What's exciting, and anyone can follow on the live stream who isn't here in person, what's exciting is the frankness of the dialogue. We have the CEOs of all the major leading global investment banks, many of the leading asset owners, asset managers, and they're all saying the same thing. They're optimistic in the long term, but they're careful and cautious in the short term. In fact, we hope meetings like this, where folks, leaders, technologists, innovators get together from across the globe, from regions affected by crisis and conflict, but really bring together a sense of shared purpose and shared humanity. We think this can be part of driving that long-term optimism. And we firmly believe that when times are uncertain, that's when we do need to meet face-to-face and have the conversations that matter.
It's no secret that Saudi Arabia has one of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds. How big a driver is that, do you think? And do you believe the hype when we hear that Saudi Arabia is the new hub of the Middle East?
And there's just an absolute sense of excitement about the scale and growth and ambition and the unique vision of what we call PIF, Public Investment Fund, to drive against a national development agenda called Saudi 2030, the Saudi Vision Goals of 2030. It's an exciting agenda, and the Sovereign Wealth Fund has been able to capitalize large projects to deliver on that vision. We're also very pleased to have the Public Investment Fund as the founding partner of FI Institute itself. So we are a nonprofit, and we hold ourselves to the standards of independence, global standards of nonprofits. So we have an independent board. We have leading investors, technologists, researchers, former government officials that serve on that board. And our operating support is actually quite independent of any one entity, because we're fortunate to count 27 strategic partners who provide sponsorship support to attend our events and to shape the agenda. This is a traditional business model for nonprofits like ourselves, and we're quite excited about members. We now have paying members. Typically would be a venture capitalist or a consultant who are also supporting the work of the FI Institute. That gives us an independent funding base, an independent board, and we offer an independent view of the markets and the role of technology in driving positive change going forward.
Can you give us a sense back here in the UK of the scale of the deals being done in the back rooms from the main conference hall that we can see where you are now? Can you give us a sense of the amount of money that's being either signed on the dotted line or exchanged hands?
We typically announce deal completed totals in the 10 billion plus range. And these are deals that in fact are being consummated at the event. When you look over time, we're in our 7th edition, so we've done this 7 years in a row. Probably 100 million to 150 million of deals have been done here and announced here. But let's be frank, that's the tip of the iceberg. Even though I'm head of investment, I'm not sitting in on these conversations, and there's a lot of relationship building and project development that's going on, and that's really what we're famous for. We provide the space for that, and we bring the real decision makers together.
And finally, Tony, I know that sustainability and ESG very high up the agenda where you are. How does that sit with Saudi Arabia, one of the world's largest oil exporters sitting on one of the world's largest oil fields, and some believe that Saudi Arabia was actually a block to progress at the COP27 last year. Do they make good bedfellows?
The country itself has actually answered this question for you. They've developed a set of goals meant to be accomplished by 2030, many of which turn upon sustainability, whether it's the development of new technologies, for example, hydrogen, which can provide zero carbon emissions and a much cleaner economy, or the improving the efficiency of existing hydrocarbon industries so that it produces the power we all need, but does so with fewer emissions. Saudi Arabia is actually a leader in this area. We develop a toolkit that we call Inclusive ESG, which provides for investors the data they need to take a close, hard look at what counts as good performance in emerging markets around these topics. And we hope to begin to shine a little more of a light in these markets, not just Saudi Arabia, but India, Thailand, Brazil, any emerging market, and drive more ESG investment and more sustainable capital flows where, in fact, they're needed most and where some of the most interesting and compelling investment opportunities are. So, in fact, we're very bullish about this. We're thinking long term, and it's all data driven.
Tony Berkeley speaking to me a short time earlier. Let's have a look at some other stories now for you. And Heineken has revealed a drop in the amount of beer it sold over the summer due to higher prices. There was a fall of 7.6% in the amount of beer sold across Europe. The average price is up 12%. That's led to a 2% rise in sales for the third quarter of the year. Bosses at the Dutch brewer, which also makes Amstel Lager and Strongbow cider, said inflation-driven price increases are tapering off after its own cost pressures eased. The boss of Waitrose has revealed that shoplifters are targeting specific high-end items, including alcohol. Dame Sharon Lewis, who is the chairman of the John Lewis Partnership, described the trend as profoundly shocking and has previously warned retail crime is reaching epidemic levels, with businesses facing a £12 million hit from shoplifting. In one instance, shoplifters were looking for a specific brand of gin, and they warned staff they would return when it was back in stock. Lloyds Banking Group has reported strong third-quarter profits thanks to higher interest rates. Britain's biggest mortgage lender revealed pre-tax profits of £1.9 billion for 3 months in September. That's up from just over £500 million the same time last year. However, shares fell 2% in early trading as investors look past the solid numbers to the lack of an unscheduled dividend or buyback payout, which some analysts were hoping for. And the tech giant Nvidia says the US has told it to stop shipping some of its high-end artificial intelligence chips to China immediately rather than next month as planned. The US government brought in the measures to stop countries including China, Iran and Russia from receiving advanced AI chips designed by the firm. Officials haven't said why they brought the timing forward, and Nvidia does not expect a near-term impact on its earnings from the move. Let's get more on that, shall we? I'm joined now by the former US government advisor, Charlie Cooper. Charlie, great to have you on the programme live from the United States. So what's behind this decision, do you think, for Joe Biden's administration to bring forward this decision to ban immediately some of these advanced AI chips?
Emma, you make an interesting point that they seem to have moved the deadline up, or they did move the deadline up for NVIDIA to stop shipping its chips. I would also note that it impacts other potential companies like Intel and others. I would say that the U.S. government and governments more broadly don't usually act rashly. In fact, they usually don't act quickly at all. And conversations have been happening behind the scenes at the Commerce Department, the Treasury Department, State, Defense, the various different other agencies within the U.S. that are looking at the impact of AI and China's acquisition of U.S. AI assets with growing concern. Now, what's happened over the last several weeks that caused them to move the timeline up is difficult to say. However, last week marked a very important summit between the head of the so-called Five Eyes, which are the intelligence agencies of the five English-speaking countries, close allies of the United States and the UK, where they met in an unprecedented setting in Silicon Valley to discuss with U.S. tech giants the threats that they see from China, not just within artificial intelligence, but more broadly across the technology sector. And I think that meeting not only got the attention of Silicon Valley executives, but also the US intelligence agencies probably learned more than they even knew when they went out there. And it's possible that several of the conversations they had last week in Silicon Valley contributed to the administration's decision to move that deadline up.
So, Charlie, what does the US fear that China might do with these advanced chips?
So artificial intelligence is a complicated thing. It sounds like it's quite easy. And the fact is the debate is out in terms of whether overall it's a good thing or a bad thing. People can talk about the benefits in terms of medicine, for instance, and various different biomedical research, in educational tools and artistic tools. And there's some conversation about the benefits and not. The concern with China in particular, though, is of military-grade artificial intelligence. We've really entered a new world, almost a new arms race based on artificial intelligence, where key countries around the world are seeking high-performance computing power, both in hardware, like the chips we're talking about, but also the software that can be built and run atop them, that would empower a next wave of weaponry that would further embolden China, potentially with their ambitions in Taiwan, potentially with their partnership with Iran and with North Korea, various different interests which they see being counter to what US interests are. China, interestingly, last week or just recently decided to call the October 7th Hamas attack a terrorist attack and condemn them for it, where they'd held off for doing that for 2 weeks. Now, that wasn't related to artificial intelligence, but it does speak to the depth of the divide on military matters between the US, the UK, and our Western allies, and how China sees its position in the world, and potentially longer term, what AI could do to bolster that.
And just briefly, Charlie, because we're running out of time, do you expect a tit-for-tat response from China on the back of this?
I think we'll constantly see a tit-for-tat response. China is a very nuanced player, and the relationship with the West is nuanced as well. They're a military foe, but they're also an economic ally. They own a ton of U.S. debt. They're a major trading partner for both the UK and the US. So it will be a delicate tit for tat. But yes, I don't think the Chinese will sit back and not have any response. I would expect to see something, definitely.
We'll leave it there. Charlie Cooper, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Emma.
Still to come this afternoon here on Business Live, we'll be having a look at how the global markets are faring this afternoon. Do stay tuned.
Whatever is going on, it is in our airspace. It's being seen by military pilots, tracked on radar, filmed on forward-looking infrared videos. So we need some answers, because whether this is China, Russia, or something else, there is a recognition, certainly in the United States, that this is a defense, national security, and flight safety concern. And the Office of the Director of National Intelligence in the United States has issued a couple of reports. And they say, look, there's likely not one single answer to this. There may be a lot of things going on concurrently. And yeah, absolutely, adversarial technology is a possibility. But neither has the extraterrestrial hypothesis been ruled out. It's still being considered, and NASA are now studying this seriously. We can ramp up the effort in the UK, just as is going on in the US. We have space tracking radar systems at RAF Fylingdales in Yorkshire. We have world-class intelligence community imagery analysis. We need to get alongside the United States and basically say, look, let's make an effort to look at this. Previously, this was glanced at, but there's this kind of lazy, bureaucratic, it can't be, so there isn't anything mindset. We need to get over that, I think. When we got photos and videos, they were blurry. The space tracking radars that we had, even the air defense radars, were not good enough. Now we have the technology. We have space tracking radar systems like Space Fence, which the United States has. We can get alongside that. We have, for the first time, the tools in our hand to answer one of the greatest questions of all time: are we alone or not? And wouldn't it be an amazing thing if we used those tools to get that answer?
Fly Emirates, fly better. Fly Emirates, fly better. Thank you.
Hi there, you're back with Business Live. Let's have a look into how the global markets are performing this afternoon. Over in Europe, the trading day is coming to an end. A mixed picture for the European markets, actually finishing higher than they certainly started. The DAX, the CAC 40, and the IBEX 35 trading higher. In Spain, in Italy, the MIB 30 is lower by 0.5%. On the London market, the FTSE 100 also slipped earlier today. It's trading to close higher by 0.3%. And if we move over now to the US markets, the Nasdaq, very much the focus at the moment. Those big tech-heavy stocks are reporting. It's trading lower there by 1.5%. More on that in just a few minutes' time. Quick whistle-stop tour on the currency markets for you now. You can see the pound is lower against the dollar and the euro, but the euro is trading higher against the dollar there. And a quick check-in as well on the price of oil, falling for 3 consecutive days, and now a price of Brent crude is down at 88.48. Right, let's get to Ellie Ingleby, Deputy Head of Portfolio Management at Atomos. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's start with Lloyds. Interesting one, actually. UK's second biggest lender. Big jump in profits, but it's not done so well on the markets today. Why?
No, it hasn't. I think that's also due to an aftershock effect from the Barclays results, which were less strong. So whilst Lloyds delivered a very strong result of expecting less struggle in its debt as well, so they changed their bad debt expectations, and they also relied on confidence of their net margin expectations. So when they are looking at how much they make on interest rates, depending on what they're taking on loans, as what they're giving on deposits, that's net, which is positive for them.
What are the banks telling you about the state of the UK economy and their beliefs on what's going to happen with interest rates?
I think there's uncertainty. There's an expectation that interest rates are going to stay the same. We look at the decision next week for the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. They are expected to hold that at 5.25%. There's also a lot of pressure from the government and from regulators for banks to pass on more of the profits they're making on those higher interest rates.
So big profits doesn't necessarily mean a good performance on the stock market. We're seeing that in the United States, aren't we? We've got these big tech mega giants posting insane amounts of revenue and big jumps in revenue. And yet, as we've just seen on the Nasdaq and the S&P 500, they're not having a great day either. What do you think is going on?
I think there's been a bull run for a long time in the US market, and it has been driven in the majority by those US tech stocks. And really, the underlying reason for that is AI. And there's a huge concern about AI of how much of a bubble is it? You know, how tangible are those results that they can deliver?
Do you know, we spoke to a gentleman earlier who said there's an AI gold rush happening right now, which always sends alarm bells for some traders. What do you make of that?
I mean, one of my favourite sayings about gold rushes in the markets is that the price of spades also increases. I think that's a fascinating thing to look at when we look at NVIDIA and companies like that.
Yeah, of course, we're just talking about that. And very quickly, let's just talk about the state of the UK economy. If we had more time, we certainly would. Really sluggish PMI numbers out yesterday. How concerned are you, very briefly?
I think we are quite concerned. Certainly in our portfolios, we actually dropped our UK exposure at the beginning of the year. There's certainly a lot of struggles that are very local to us as an economy. And I think as the year goes on, we'll have more certainty over what's going to happen. But we're certainly quite cautious when investing there.
OK, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. Ellie Ingleby, the Deputy Head of Portfolio Management at Atomos. We'll see you again shortly. Thank you. That's it from me. I'm back again with Business Live tomorrow morning at 11:30 with plenty more on the business agenda. But back to mainstream news now here on Sky News at the top of the hour.
5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
It's 5 o'clock, you're watching the News Hour. I'm Mark Austin, live from Jerusalem, coming up in the next 60 minutes. Crisis point, the warning that aid will end in Gaza in a matter of hours as supplies run out. We speak to a doctor live. The head of the UN rejects Israel's accusation that he justified Hamas's attack on October the 7th.